Poor mother with twins in her arms takes a blanket out of her bag to buy milk for them, but a billionaire sees it and does the impossible. The sky was darkening quickly as the biting wind swept across the city's sidewalks. It was a particularly cold October afternoon, with heavy clouds promising rain at any moment. People rushed their steps, bundled up in heavy coats, dodging puddles and sheltering themselves from the wind that seemed to find every gap in their clothing. Sarah Evans adjusted the tiny cap on Lily's head and checked that Chloe was safely secured against her chest, fastened by a cloth that served as a makeshift carrier. The 6-month-old twins were identical: alert brown eyes, thin dark hair, round cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Lily, always the more restless one, squirmed in her arm, while Chloe observed the world with surprising calm. "Just a little longer," Sarah murmured, kissing the top of Lily's head. "We'll be somewhere warm soon." The weight of the 2 children made the walk harder, but Sarah was used to it. In the past few months, her body had learned to bear loads she would have once deemed impossible. Her arms developed a new strength, as did her resolve. It was what happened when there was no other choice. The lights of the small neighborhood market flickered ahead, offering the promise of temporary shelter from the cold. Sarah quickened her pace, feeling the first raindrops touch her face. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hum, and the warm air inside enveloped her like a hug. The market wasn't large, just 6 aisles under fluorescent lights. Soft background music played low, almost inaudible under the hum of the refrigerators. At this hour there were few customers, an advantage for someone who needed to navigate the aisles with 2 small children. Sarah headed directly to the baby products section, a path she knew well. Her eyes quickly located the cans of powdered formula, organized by brand and size. She chose the most economical option, gauging the can's weight with her free hand. It wasn't the brand the girls were used to, but it would have to do. That's when her gaze fell on a pile of blankets on a clearance sale. They weren't sophisticated, just polyester fabric in basic colors, but they seemed warm enough. Sarah moved closer, still balancing Lily on her arm. With her free hand, she touched one of the blue blankets, feeling the soft texture between her fingers. The heater in her apartment barely worked, emitting more noise than heat. The old windows let in cold drafts, making the nights a constant battle against the temperature. The girls needed another layer of protection. Sarah picked up the blanket and held it against her chest for a moment. Then she checked the price tag and did the math mentally. Would the crumpled money in her pocket be enough for both items? She counted the bills and coins again. The answer was clear and painful. She had to choose. Lily started to fuss in her arm, as if sensing her mother's tension. Chloe, still strapped to Sarah's chest, slept peacefully. "Better buy milk," Sarah whispered, in a silent dialogue with herself. "You're hungry. I'll warm you up." The decision was made. With a contained sigh, she returned the blanket to the pile and headed for the checkout, holding the can of formula firmly. It was always like this: impossible choices, painful prioritizations. Food came first, always. The cashier was a young man who looked bored, typing with mechanical movements. At least there was no line. "That will be $12.40, he said without looking up. Sarah adjusted Lily to a more comfortable position and began to take the money out of her pocket with her free hand, an operation she had perfected with practice. The bills were folded, and the coins rattled in the bottom. "Mom, you forgot something." The deep, calm voice came from behind her. Sarah turned eyes confused and saw a man holding the blue blanket she had left behind. He wasn't very tall, but he had a solid, tranquil presence. Dark hair with streaks of grey at the temples and deep brown eyes that seemed to see beyond the superficial. He was dressed simply: dark pants, a grey sweater over a white shirt. Good quality clothes, but not ostentatious. "I didn't," Sarah began to explain, feeling her face flush. "I'm just taking the milk." The man looked at her, then at the twins, and then at the blanket in his hands. There was no pity in his gaze, just a quiet understanding that required no explanation. "Both items, please," he said to the cashier, placing the blanket next to the can of formula. "You don't have to," Sarah protested, her pride fighting against the need. "I don't even know you." "It's cold," he replied simply, already pulling his wallet out of his pocket. "They need both. Let me cover this." There was something in the straightforward way he spoke, without drama, without making her a charity case, that silenced Sarah's protests. It was just a practical observation. It was cold, the children needed the blanket, he could pay. "Thank you," she said, when he handed her the bag with the purchases. The word felt too small to express what she was feeling. "Elias," the man introduced himself, extending his hand. "Elias Vance." "Sarah Evans," she replied, briefly shaking his hand. His touch was warm and firm. At that moment, Lily began to whimper louder, tired of being held in the same arm for so long. Sarah tried to adjust her, now also holding the bag, a difficult balance that threatened to fail. Elias watched the scene without immediately intervening. He didn't assume she couldn't handle the children alone, something Sarah silently noticed and appreciated. Many people rushed to help, making her feel even more incapable. "Have you eaten today?" he asked suddenly. The question was direct, yet non-invasive. And, more importantly, it hit the core of a truth Sarah hadn't even admitted to herself. She hadn't eaten anything substantial since the day before. Her silence was a sufficient answer. "Let me offer you a warm meal," Elias continued, in a tone that allowed no refusal, but also didn't sound authoritarian. "Then I'll help you carry the groceries." Sarah hesitated. The big city had taught her to distrust strangers, especially men who approached women alone. But there was something about Elias that didn't set off her internal alarms. Perhaps it was the respectful way he kept his distance, or how his eyes seemed transparent in their sincerity. "There's a family diner on the corner," he added, noticing her hesitation. "A busy place. You can check it on your phone if you want." The fact that he suggested she verify the location showed he understood her concerns and respected them, a small detail that did not go unnoticed. "All right," Sarah finally agreed. The cold was intensifying, and the prospect of a few hours in a heated environment with real food felt like an oasis in a desert of difficulties. They left the market together, facing the biting wind that now carried more raindrops. Elias didn't try to take the bag from her hands or make any attempt to touch the children, another gesture of silent respect. The diner was just a few steps away. It was a modest establishment, with large windows that showed the cozy interior. Wooden tables were spaced adequately, yellowish lights created a comfortable atmosphere, and the aroma of home-cooked food made Sarah's stomach react instantly. A middle-aged waitress led them to a table near a heater. Without asking, she brought a high chair for a baby. "We only have one," she explained with an apologetic smile. "That's fine," Elias replied. "I can hold one of them if the mother allows." Sarah placed Lily in the high chair and kept Chloe on her lap. But the little one, previously asleep, began to wake and fidget. "Do they eat solid food yet?" Elias asked, examining the menu. "I started introducing it a few weeks ago," Sarah replied, surprised by the natural flow of the conversation. "Fair, but they still rely heavily on the formula." When the waitress returned, Elias ordered soup for everyone, plus a stew for Sarah and mashed potatoes for the twins. He didn't check the prices once. While they waited, Chloe became more restless in Sarah's lap. Lily, in the high chair, was clapping her tiny hands on the table, demanding attention. "May I?" Elias asked, extending his arms toward Chloe. Sarah briefly hesitated before passing the baby to him. To her surprise, Chloe settled easily into Elias's arms, looking curiously at his face. "Do you have children?" Sarah asked, seeing the natural way he held the little one. "No," Elias replied, "but I have nephews. The youngest is 2. The food arrived, emitting aromas that made Sarah realize how hungry she was. The steaming soup, the hearty stew, the smooth mashed potatoes, everything looked incredibly appetizing. With one hand free to eat and the other helping to feed Lily, Sarah finally managed to satisfy the hunger she had ignored for so long. "Eat at ease," Elias said, as if reading her thoughts. "I'll hold her." Only when the initial urgency of hunger subsided did Sarah begin to wonder more about the man who had appeared so suddenly in her life. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. Elias did not seem surprised by the question. Because I can, he replied simply. And because it needed to be done. There were no elaborate speeches, no stories of redemption, no complicated explanations, just a straightforward answer that, somehow, made sense in its simplicity. I'm unemployed, Sarah said, feeling she owed some explanation. Raising two alone, it's not easy. Elias merely nodded. He didn't ask about the children's father, or her family, or how she had gotten into this situation. He simply accepted the information and continued holding Chloe, who was now playing with a button on his sweater. That non-judgmental silence was, perhaps, the greatest gift he could offer. In a world where everyone seemed to have an opinion on how she should live her life, someone who simply listened was a rarity. They finished the meal in a comfortable silence. Elias paid the bill without fanfare and helped organize the children for the exit. Outside, night had completely fallen, and the thin rain continued to fall. Where do you live? He asked. Not far. 4 blocks in that direction, Sarah pointed. Elias nodded and took the bag of groceries, letting Sarah carry the children. They walked side by side, with Elias adjusting his pace to match her slower rhythm. The fine rain dampened their hair and clothes, but neither of them hurried. There was an odd comfort in that shared walk. The building where Sarah lived was old, with peeling paint and a poorly lit entrance. 3 flights of stairs led to her apartment on the 3rd floor. I live here, she said, stopping at the entrance. I can take it from here. Elias looked at the stairs and at her, carrying the 2 children, and continued holding the bag without saying anything. Together, they climbed the worn steps until they reached the 3rd floor hallway. The apartment was small but organized, with the care of someone who valued every inch of space. A living room merged with the kitchen, a half-open door revealing a modest bedroom. There were no luxuries, but there were signs of life, photographs on the walls, a vase with a hardy plant, simple toys organized in a box. Elias placed the bag on the table and took out the blue blanket, carefully unfolding it before placing it over the arm of the sofa. You don't owe me anything, he said, turning toward the door. I hope you all sleep better tonight. There was a quiet finality in his words. He had done what he considered necessary, without expecting recognition or gratitude. Sarah, still holding the twins, felt a strange mix of emotions. For a few hours, the burden of carrying everything alone had been shared, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Thank you, Elias, she said, putting more into the words than she could possibly express. He nodded once, with a small smile that reached his eyes, and left, closing the door softly. The apartment felt strangely empty after he was gone. Sarah stood looking at the closed door for a few moments, processing the unexpected encounter. Then, the twins brought her back to the present moment, reminding her that life continued. While preparing the bottles with the newly purchased formula, Sarah wondered if she would see Elias again. Probably not, she concluded. People like him, good people, rarely appeared in life, like shooting stars, bright, remarkable, but fleeting. What she didn't know was that, unlike shooting stars, some good people have a habit of returning, changing orbits and destinies with their constant presence. 3 days after the encounter at the market, the doorbell rang. Sarah wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, she peeked through the peephole and recognized Elias's figure standing in the hallway. He held a paper bag and had the same tranquil expression as before. I was passing by and thought I'd check how you were doing, he said when she opened the door. In his hands, a bag with fresh fruits, a package of the right-sized diapers, and a box of tea. Nothing extravagant, just practical items she needed. I don't want to intrude, he added. So I'll just leave this and go. Sarah hesitated only for a second before opening the door wider. Would you like to come in for a bit? The girls just woke up. The twins were on the living room rug, lying on a blanket, the same blue one Elias had bought. Their little eyes fixed on the visitor with that open curiosity that only babies possess. Elias sat on the floor, at a respectful distance. He didn't try to pick up the children or invade their space. He just stayed there, watching while Sarah put the fruits in the nearly empty fruit bowl. "How have you been?" he asked, with no pressure in his voice. "Better," Sarah replied. "I managed to schedule a job interview for next week." "At a bakery." "That's good," Elias commented, without offering unsolicited advice or invasive questions. He only stayed for 20 minutes. Before leaving, he looked at Sarah with that direct expression she was beginning to recognize. "Is it okay if I show up again?" "Yes," she answered, surprising herself with the quickness of the reply. 1 week turned into 2. Elias appeared at irregular intervals, sometimes 3 days in a row, sometimes with a break of 4 or 5 days. He never called beforehand, but somehow he always seemed to arrive at opportune moments, when Sarah had just put the girls down for a nap and needed a minute to breathe, or when she was trying to cook dinner with one baby crying and the other clinging to her leg. He never came empty-handed. They weren't expensive or unnecessary gifts, just useful things that showed attention to detail. A new bottle when he noticed one of the old ones was cracked, a diaper rash cream when he saw Chloe's skin was irritated, a package of cookies Sarah had mentioned liking. "You don't have to bring things every time," she said one Thursday afternoon when he appeared with a bag of apples and cereals. "I know," Elias replied, hanging his coat on the hook near the door, a gesture that now seemed natural. "But I like to bring them." There was no specific pattern to his visits, except for the constancy. Sometimes he would stay only 15 minutes, other times a whole hour. Some days he would talk a lot, asking about the job interview or commenting on a book. On others, he would remain in comfortable silence, simply present while Sarah did her chores. What remained consistent was the respect. Elias never showed up too early or too late. He never entered without an invitation. He never questioned Sarah's decisions about the children. He never crossed the invisible boundaries she had set. Lily was the first to become attached. By the beginning of the 2nd month, she was already reaching out her little arms when she saw him arrive. Elias would pick her up gently, always checking first with his eyes to see if Sarah allowed it. "She likes you," Sarah commented, watching her daughter play peacefully in his lap. "Children know how to recognize who truly cares about them," Elias simply replied. One Sunday afternoon, Elias arrived with a larger-than-usual bag. Inside was a simple mobile for the crib and 2 small educational toys. "I saw them in a store. They're meant to stimulate motor development," he explained, without making a fuss. "But if you don't like them, I can take them back." Sarah picked up one of the toys, colorful, with different textures, suitable for the girls' age. It was exactly the kind of thing she would have chosen if she could. "It's perfect," she said. "You always seem to know." Elias shrugged, with that easygoing manner that made everything seem simple. "I just pay attention." That afternoon, he stayed for dinner. Sarah had prepared a simple soup, nothing elaborate, but he ate it as if it were a feast. "You cook well," he commented. "It's just soup," she laughed, for the first time in a long while. "A good soup," he insisted, taking a second serving. The twins were already in the phase of trying new flavors, and Elias watched with interest as Sarah gave them small spoons of the broth. "Chloe is more adventurous with food," Sarah explained. "Lily needs more time to accept new things." "Different personalities," Elias commented. "It's nice to see." After dinner, he helped wash the dishes without Sarah having to ask. There was something deeply comforting in the domesticity of that moment, the girls playing on the rug, the 2 adults in the small kitchen, the night slowly falling outside. When everything was clean and put away, Elias dried his hands and looked at the clock. "It's getting late." "I should go." Sarah felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. Elias's visits had become points of light in her often exhausting routine. When he was present, the tasks seemed less heavy, the challenges less daunting. "You show up and everything feels lighter," she said, the words slipping out before she could filter them. Elias looked at her with that total attention he dedicated to everything, as if, in that moment, nothing else in the world mattered besides that conversation. "I come because I want to," he replied simply, "and I stay if I can." There were no grand declarations in those words, No elaborate promises. It was just a straightforward truth, like everything that came from Elias. And because of that, Sarah believed him completely. The days went by, the weeks piled up. Fall advanced. The nights grew longer. Elias's presence became part of the natural rhythm of the house, not an intrusion, but a welcome addition. He was there when Sarah received the news that she had gotten the job at the bakery. He celebrated with a small cake he brought from a local pastry shop. "Part-time, to start," she explained. "From 8 to noon, while I look for a daycare that fits the budget." Elias didn't offer immediate solutions or try to fix everything. Instead, he asked pertinent questions, listened carefully, and respected the fact that Sarah wanted to find her own way. He was there on the morning of the first day of work, arriving early to stay with the twins while the babysitter Sarah had hired hadn't shown up. "She said she'd be here at 7:30, Sarah explained, nervously checking the clock repeatedly. "If she doesn't come, I'll miss my first day." "It will work out," Elias said with that calmness that seemed to soothe even the air around him. "And if it doesn't, I'll stay with them until you find another solution." The babysitter arrived, 10 minutes late and full of apologies. Sarah rushed out, her heart split between the anxiety of the new job and the worry for her daughters. When she returned 4 hours later, she found the house in order, the twins fed and happy, and the babysitter impressed with how well-behaved the girls were. Elias was gone, but he had left a simple note on the table. "Congratulations on your first day. I'll be back later." And he returned, as he always did, without fanfare, without demanding gratitude, without making it a grand sacrifice, just being present, a silent constancy amidst the chaos that life often was. It was on one of those evenings, while watching Elias read a story to the twins, even though they were too young to understand, that Sarah realized how much her life had changed since that cold afternoon at the market. It wasn't just the practical help or the items he brought. It was the security of knowing she was no longer completely alone. It was the lightness that came from sharing, even if for a few hours, the burden of all the decisions and responsibilities. At some point, without grand declarations or dramatic moments, Elias had become an essential part of that small universe Sarah was building day after day. And this, she now realized, was a different kind of miracle, a feat of simple moments, small gestures, and a constancy worth more than 1,000 grand promises. The job at the bakery was now a month old. Sarah had adapted well to the routine, waking up at 5 in the morning, getting the twins ready, dropping them off with the sitter, and rushing to work. Her hands smelled of yeast and sugar when she came back, and sometimes she brought a leftover bread or pastry at the end of her shift. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One Friday afternoon, Elias arrived with a small pot of violets and a box of tea. The twins fully recognized him now. Lily screamed with joy when she saw him come in, and Chloe, more reserved, cracked a smile that lit up her tiny face. "How was your week?" he asked, placing the pot on the kitchen windowsill. "Tiring," Sarah replied, pouring tea for both of them. "But good." "The manager said I'm learning fast," Elias smiled. That discreet smile that seemed reserved only for genuine moments. "I don't doubt it. You are observant." They sat at the small kitchen table while the twins played on the rug with the toys Elias had brought weeks earlier. There was a comfortable familiarity in those moments, a routine that didn't need to be announced or explained. "I brought something for the girls," Elias commented, pulling 2 small cloth books from his bag. "They're simple stories, with different textures. I read it's good for motor development." Sarah took the books, running her fingers over the colorful pages. They were quality items, designed to last, like everything Elias brought. "You don't have to spend money on us all the time," she said, though she already knew the answer. "I know," Elias replied, as he always did. "But I like to do it." They drank their tea in a comfortable silence, watching the twins, who were now attempting to crawl across the floor, developing the first movements that would soon turn into actual crawling. It was then that the noise happened. 3 loud knocks on the door, followed by an authoritarian female voice. "Mrs. Evans?" "We need to talk about the rent." Sarah froze, the cup halfway to her mouth. Her eyes widened in panic, and she looked at Elias as if searching for an emergency exit. "It's the building manager," she whispered, placing the cup on the table with trembling hands. "It's the third time this week," the knocking repeated, more insistent. "I know you're in there. We can resolve this civilly, but if you keep ignoring—" Elias placed his hand over Sarah's, a brief, comforting touch. "Do you want me to answer?" Sarah hesitated for only a second before shaking her head negatively. She took a deep breath, tucked her hair behind her ear, and stood up. "No. I'll talk to her myself." She opened the door just enough to see the building manager, a middle-aged woman with black hair pulled back in a severe bun and an expression that oscillated between irritation and bureaucratic tiredness. "Mrs. Evans, I'm sorry, but I can no longer postpone this conversation. You are 2 months behind on rent and—" "I know," Sarah interrupted, her voice low so the words wouldn't reach the twins. "I started a new job. I'm organizing my finances. I just need a little more time." The manager sighed, an expression that suggested she had heard that story before. "I understand your situation, but I have responsibilities to the landlord. If there is no solution by Monday, I will have to initiate the eviction process." The word eviction hit Sarah like a punch. She felt the blood drain from her face and her legs weaken. Where would she go with 2 small children? How would she find another place to rent with her payment history now tarnished? "I understand," was all she could manage to say. "By Monday." She closed the door and leaned against it, as if she needed the support to stay upright. When she returned to the kitchen, she found Elias exactly where she had left him, but his gaze revealed he had heard the conversation. "I'm 2 months behind on rent," Sarah said, her voice almost breaking. "If they start the proceedings, I don't know what I'll do." It wasn't just a financial confession, it was the exposure of her greatest vulnerability, the constant fear of losing their roof, of not being able to provide the basics for her daughters, of failing in the most fundamental of responsibilities. Elias didn't immediately offer solutions or money. He didn't lecture her about financial planning or ask why she hadn't mentioned it before. Instead, he asked a simple question. "Who handles this? The building manager?" Sarah nodded, sitting down again. "Yes, she manages the building. The owner doesn't even show up here." Elias took another sip of tea, thoughtful. His eyes met Sarah's, direct and clear. "Would you mind if I talked to her?" Sarah hesitated. Her pride fought against the panic of the situation, but looking at the twins playing obliviously on the rug, she realized she couldn't afford the luxury of pride. "No," she finally answered. "I don't mind." Elias nodded once, put his cup on the table and stood up unhurriedly. "I'll go talk to her." "I'll stay with the girls," Sarah said, but he shook his head. "You don't have to. Stay with them. I'll be right back." And he left, closing the door softly behind him. The next 20 minutes were some of the longest in Sarah's life. She tried to distract herself with the twins, but her mind was buzzing with worries. What would Elias say to the manager? How would he solve something she hadn't been able to in weeks of attempts? When she finally heard the door open, she turned so quickly she almost knocked over the pot of violets. Elias walked in with the same tranquil expression as always, as if he had only gone out to buy bread. "It's settled," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "I paid the 2 months overdue and next month's too." Sarah looked at the receipt in his hands, feeling a confusing mix of gratitude, relief, and embarrassment. "Elias, I don't know how I'll pay you back. It's a lot of money." "Now you can breathe," he replied, sitting down at the table again. "This isn't a favor. Hence just someone wanting to see you do well." The simplicity of that sentence disarmed Sarah completely. There was no implicit charge, no expectation of return, no ego to be massaged with excessive gratitude, just a genuine, unattached act. "Why?" she asked, the only word she could articulate. Elias thought for a moment, as if truly considering the question seriously. "Because no one should lose sleep over a roof or food," he finally replied, "especially someone who works as hard as you do." Sarah looked at the receipt again. That piece of paper represented more than money. It was breathing room, time to reorganize. a chance to move forward without the overwhelming weight of the imminent threat. "Thank you," she said, and for the first time since they met, she took the initiative to touch his hand across the table. The contact was brief, just their fingers meeting for a few seconds, but it carried a meaning that words couldn't adequately express. From the living room rug, Lily let out a giggle while playing with the cloth book, breaking the moment. Elias and Sarah turned toward the children, smiling. "I think she liked the present," Elias commented. "She liked the giver," Sarah corrected softly. And on that ordinary afternoon, in the small kitchen of a modest apartment, something important changed, not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but in the silent way two adults began to build a different kind of trust. The small apartment was illuminated by the late afternoon sun when Elias arrived, carrying a bag of groceries and a package of cookies for tea. It had become a Friday ritual, that quiet time when the bakery work finished earlier and the twins took their afternoon nap. Sarah opened the door with a tired smile. The bakery work was exhausting, waking up before dawn, hours on her feet, the constant heat of the ovens. But it was a job, a fresh start. "Brought new tea," Elias said, pulling a box from the bag. "The grocer said it's special." While Sarah prepared the tea, Elias placed the bag on the small table and looked out the window. Outside, the city maintained its fast pace, indifferent to the small victories and defeats happening inside that apartment. 3 months had passed since the encounter at the market. 3 months of constant visits, small gestures, a presence that required no explanation. "Are the girls sleeping well?" he asked, when Sarah put the cups on the table. "Better," she replied, sitting down. "Chloe still wakes up once in the middle of the night, but Lily has been sleeping all the way through." "That's good," Elias commented, blowing on his hot tea. "And the job?" Sarah hesitated, a small furrow forming between her eyebrows. "It's fine," she said finally, but her tone betrayed the automatic answer. Elias waited, giving her space to elaborate if she wished. It was one of the things Sarah appreciated most about him, the way his silence didn't pressure, it just welcomed. "Actually," she continued after a few sips of tea, "it's tough. The pay is low for the hours, the manager is demanding, and even with the rent paid, it's still tight to cover everything." It was the longest confession she had made about her difficulties. A month ago she might not have shared even this much. But Elias's constant presence had created a space where vulnerability was not synonymous with weakness. Elias nodded, absorbing her words without interrupting. "And there's still the sitter," Sarah continued, now that she had started. "She's good with the girls, but the money I pay her eats up almost half of what I earn. Sometimes I think maybe it's not worth it, that I should be with them instead." The sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the kitchen in golden tones. From the room next door came the soft sound of the sleeping twins, breathing. For a moment, only that sound filled the apartment. "You have strength," Elias finally said, his voice calm and firm. "I've more strength than many people I know." Sarah raised her eyes, surprised by the direct statement. "But you don't have to carry everything alone," he continued. "I want to help you get back on your feet, your way." There was something important in that last phrase, your way. It wasn't charity disguised as help. It wasn't control masked as support. It was genuine respect for her autonomy, for her right to chart her own course. "What do you like to do?" Elias asked. "Before the girls, before all this, what gave you joy?" The question took Sarah by surprise. It had been so long since she had thought in terms of liking or joy. Survival had occupied all the space where dreams and personal preferences once existed. "I used to bake," she replied after a moment. "Not just to eat, but to create, especially cakes and pies." As she spoke, a different light came into her eyes, a spark of something that had been dormant for a long time. "I actually sold homemade cakes," she continued, the pace of her voice quickening with the memory. "To friends, then acquaintances, even to a few coffee shops. It wasn't a lot, but it was mine, you know, something I built from scratch." Elias smiled, observing that subtle transformation. "And would you like to do that again?" Sarah began, but stopped. The shine in her eyes wavered like a flame threatened by the wind. "I don't know." With the twins, the bakery job. It's just an idea, Elias said, leaning back in his chair. You don't have to decide now. But the seed had been planted. For the rest of the visit, they talked about other subjects, the girls' growth, a book Elias was reading, the weather starting to warm up. However, Sarah seemed distant, as if part of her mind was exploring a newly discovered possibility. When Elias said goodbye, she accompanied him to the door with a different look, no longer just gratitude or quiet affection, but something new, a flicker of purpose. 3 days later, Sarah called Elias for the first time since they met. It was usually him who initiated contact, showing up at times that, somehow, always seemed perfect. I thought about what you said, she spoke as soon as he answered, without preamble, about the cakes. And, his voice conveyed genuine interest, even over the phone. I want to try, Sarah replied, the decision clear in her voice. Start small. Maybe sell here in the building to the neighbors, test if I still remember how to do it. That sounds like a good plan, Elias commented. Can I help in any way? There was a brief silence, as if Sarah was gathering the courage for an important step. Actually, I'd like to go to the market to buy the ingredients. The twins get fussy when I go alone. If you could come along. Of course, Elias replied immediately. When? Tomorrow afternoon, after I get back from the bakery. I'll be there. The market was relatively empty that Thursday afternoon. Elias pushed the cart where Lily and Chloe were sitting, both entertained with small toys he had brought especially for the occasion. Sarah walked ahead, a list in her hand and a new concentration in her movements. She was no longer the exhausted, overwhelmed woman from their first meeting. There was a determination in her steps, a clear purpose. I need first-quality flour, she explained, stopping at the baking product section. It's the foundation of everything. Hand-fresh eggs, real butter, not margarine. Elias watched with interest as she meticulously examined each product, comparing prices and qualities. This was a different Sarah, confident, knowledgeable, in command. What do you think? She asked, showing him 2 different brands of chocolate. This one is more expensive, but the flavor is more intense. Is it worth the difference? You're the expert, Elias replied with a smile. I trust your judgment. There was something profoundly significant in that response. It wasn't just a polite evasion, it was a sincere declaration of confidence in her abilities, an acknowledgement of her expertise. As they walked the aisles, Sarah explained every choice, every ingredient. She talked about textures, flavor combinations, techniques she had learned over the years. Elias listened attentively, asking occasional questions that showed genuine interest, never interrupting or trying to steer her decisions. These strawberries would be perfect for decorating, she commented, examining the fruit, but they are out of budget right now. I'll start with something simpler. When they reached the checkout, the cart was full not only of basic ingredients, flour, sugar, eggs, but also small specialty items that would transform common recipes into unique creations. Good quality vanilla extract, fresh nuts, imported cinnamon. Elias noticed Sarah's hesitation when the total value appeared on the screen. Consider it an investment, he simply said, handing his card to the cashier before she could protest. You can pay me back in cake. On the way back, Sarah seemed different, lighter, more animated. She talked about recipes she intended to test, flavors she wanted to experiment with. The twins, sensing their mother's enthusiasm, laughed and babbled in the stroller that Elias skillfully pushed between pedestrians. When they arrived at the apartment, Elias helped organize the groceries in the small kitchen. There wasn't much space, but he reorganized a few cabinets to accommodate the new supplies. I'll start with a simple cake, Sarah said, already separating ingredients. Chocolate, to test the oven, see how it behaves. Elias watched as she worked, her hands moving with precision and confidence. He didn't offer help. He realized this was a moment when she needed to rediscover her own rhythm, her own capacity. You don't have to stay and watch, Sarah commented, carefully measuring flour. It must be boring. It's not, Elias replied with sincerity. It's good to see someone doing something they love. The apartment was soon filled with the aroma of baking chocolate, a rich, comforting smell that seemed to push away the atmosphere of constant struggle that had previously permeated the environment. Even the twins seemed to feel the change, watching curiously from the play area Ilias had improvised in the living room. When the cake came out of the oven, golden and perfectly risen, Sarah's smile was radiant. "I still remember how to do it," she said, more to herself than to Elias. In the following days, the apartment transformed into a small, improvised bakery. Sarah tested recipes in the hours between working at the bakery and caring for the twins. Elias appeared regularly, but never imposed himself. He watched from a distance, tasted when invited, and offered opinions only when asked. The first sale happened almost by accident. The building manager, walking through the hallway, smelled a cinnamon cake fresh out of the oven and knocked on the door to ask, "How much is it?" she inquired after tasting a slice Sarah offered as a sample. The question caught Sarah off guard. She looked at Elias, who was sitting with Chloe on his lap. "What do you think is fair?" He returned the question, leaving the decision in her hands. Sarah mentioned a price, reasonable for the work and ingredients, but still accessible. The manager not only bought that cake, but ordered another one for the next day. "I have a condo meeting," she explained. "Your cake will impress those old gossips." It was the beginning. The manager mentioned it to other residents. Soon, Sarah had enough orders to occupy her evenings and weekends. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was significant, enough to supplement her bakery salary and start building a small reserve. "You should create business cards," Elias suggested one afternoon, while playing with Lily on the rug. "Nothing too elaborate. Just your name, contact, and artisan homemade cakes, Amo." Sarah considered the idea while finishing the frosting on a carrot cake. "You think there's a market for it, beyond the building?" "You won't know unless you try," Elias replied. "And your cakes are special. They have a flavor you don't find in ordinary bakeries." 3 weeks after the start of sales, Sarah reduced her shifts at the bakery to part-time 3 times a week. She now spent more time with the twins and was still able to fulfill the growing orders for cakes, which came not only from building residents, but also from her contact networks. The apartment was also starting to change. The smell of cake and spices replaced the odor of mold that had previously permeated the environment. Small touches, a plant here, a colorful curtain there, emerged as Sarah reinvested part of the earnings into making the space more welcoming. Elias remained present, but in a different way. He didn't make deliveries or interfere in the business. That was Sarah's territory, her project, her regaining of independence. But he showed up regularly, bringing a new toy for the girls, fresh bread for a snack, or simply his tranquil presence. On a particularly busy Saturday afternoon, Sarah was working on 3 orders simultaneously, while the twins played in the living room. Elias arrived unannounced, as he often did, and sat on the floor between the children. "Look what I brought," he said, pulling 2 small plush horses from his bag. Chloe, usually the quietest, let out a shout of joy and reached out her arms for the toy. Lily, already more active, quickly crawled to grab hers. From the kitchen, Sarah watched the scene, the sound of her daughter's laughter mixed with the aroma of the cake in the oven, and the sense of competence returning to her hands. For a brief moment, she felt an emotion so intense that she had to stop what she was doing. It wasn't just gratitude for what Elias had done, it was something deeper, the recognition of her own strength, her capacity to rebuild, to create beauty, even from the most difficult circumstances. Elias looked up and met her gaze. He didn't say anything, just smiled, that quiet smile that seemed to understand exactly what she was feeling. Sarah returned to work, her hands moving with renewed confidence among the ingredients. The small apartment, once just a shelter against the world, was beginning to transform into something more. A home, a space of creation, a place where life, finally, seemed to blossom into possibilities. Winter was beginning to give way to spring. Small signs of renewal appeared on the city's trees, and the sunlight lingered a little longer each day. Inside the small apartment, other, less visible but equally important, transformations were also taking place. Saturday afternoon. Sarah had finished the day's cake deliveries, 3 special orders that had occupied her entire morning. Her business was growing slowly but consistently. Each new customer brought others, in an organic expansion based on the quality of her work. She was wiping the last traces of flour from the counter when the doorbell rang. The twins, playing in the playpen in the living room, immediately lifted their little heads as if they knew exactly who was at the door. "Eid!" Lily exclaimed when Sarah opened the door, her small voice still working to master the words. He entered carrying a larger-than-usual bag and a smile that seemed reserved only for those 3. "I thought I'd spend some time with you," he said, hanging his coat on the hook that, without anyone needing to decide, had become his. "If I'm not interrupting." "You never interrupt," Sarah replied, watching the girls fidget in the playpen, eager to be noticed. Elias approached the twins, crouching down to their level. "And how are the princesses today?" he asked, opening his arms to receive the clumsy hugs of the little ones, who could now stand up holding onto the playpen bars. Sarah watched the scene from the kitchen, finishing wiping her hands. There was something deeply moving in the way Elias interacted with the girls, without condescension, without that artificial voice adults often use with children, just genuine interest and affection. "I brought a few things," he commented, turning toward the bag he had left near the door. Nothing much. The nothing much turned out to be 3 colorful cloth books, each with different textures and small interactive elements, zippers, buttons, ribbons that made noise when pulled. "They're at the age to explore with their hands," Elias explained, as he opened the playpen to sit on the floor with the twins. "And these are made to survive the intensive investigation of curious babies." Sarah smiled, recognizing the thoughtfulness behind that choice. As always, Elias didn't bring random gifts. Each item was carefully considered, perfectly suited to the stage the girls were in. "Coffee?" she offered, already putting water to boil. "Please," he replied, now totally absorbed in the task of showing the twins how to open the small zippers on the books. The afternoon progressed with a tranquility that had once seemed impossible in that apartment. Elias sitting on the rug, the girls exploring the new books, Sarah moving between the kitchen and the living room with a growing sense of contentment. At one point, Elias began to sing. They weren't conventional children's songs, but improvised melodies, silly lyrics about bears eating cakes and princesses building sandcastles. The twins listened, fascinated, sometimes clapping their hands out of sync, other times trying to follow along with enthusiastic babbling. "Oh, Chloe is going to be musical," Elias commented when the little one tried to imitate one of the melodies. "She has a good ear." "Just like her dad," Sarah said without thinking, and then stopped, surprised by her own words. It was the first time she had mentioned the twins' father in Elias's presence, an unexplored territory that both had silently avoided until then. But Elias merely nodded, without pressing for more information. "Talents sometimes skip generations," he commented simply, returning his attention to Lily, who was trying to climb his leg as if it were a mountain. The afternoon light created golden patterns on the living room floor, as Elias now invented a game of hide-and-seek with the small books, making the twins scream with joy every time they discovered where the hidden object was. Sarah sat on the sofa, her cup of coffee in her hands, simply observing. It was a scene she would have considered impossible months ago, this feeling of lightness, of security, of accumulated small joys. "Is the moon made of cheese?" Elias now hummed, using a deep voice that made the girls laugh. "Or is it marshmallow?" "No one knows, no one's seen, but they say a little mouse went up." The twins giggled, fascinated not only by the absurd lyrics, but by the exaggerated gestures that accompanied them. Lily tried to imitate, raising her little arms and shaking her head from side to side. A wave of emotion hit Sarah unexpectedly. It was as if only at that moment did she fully comprehend how much her life had changed since that cold afternoon at the market. It wasn't just the material improvements, the rent paid, the growing business, the fuller refrigerator. It was something deeper, more essential. "You brought peace to this house," she said, the words coming out before she could filter them. "I almost didn't remember what that was like." Elias stopped his singing and looked at her, His eyes met hers with a tranquil intensity, without rush or expectation. There was no need for a verbal response. The connection was there, in the silence between them, in the way time seemed to slow down when they looked at each other like that. Chloe broke the moment, throwing one of the small books which hit Elias's chin. He feigned exaggerated shock, making the girls laugh again. Life continued its flow, with its small interruptions and surprises, but something fundamental had been recognized and affirmed in that brief exchanged glance. There was time. There was space for feelings to grow naturally, without pressure. There was, finally, the possibility of a future that was not just survival, but full life. And for now, that was more than enough. Spring had fully set in. The nights were still cool, but without the biting cold of winter. In the small apartment, the windows stayed open longer, letting in the breeze that carried the scent of the flowers beginning to bloom in the neighborhood beds. It was one of those quiet, late evenings. The twins, now almost 11 months old, were sleeping soundly in their room. It had been busy days for them, Lily's first wobbly steps, Chloe's first clearly pronounced words. Each small achievement was celebrated as an everyday miracle. Sarah and Elias were on the small makeshift balcony, just the living room windowsill, wide enough to hold 2 cups and a plate with slices of the new cake she was testing. The city sparkled below them, golden and silver lights dotting the darkness like earthly stars. "The lemon one is better than the orange," Elias commented, tasting a piece of the cake. "More balanced." "I thought so too," Sarah agreed. "I'll include it on next week's menu." Her business continued to grow at a steady pace. She no longer worked at the bakery. The cakes occupied all her available time, and the return was significantly better. She now had a small, loyal clientele, and even 2 local coffee shops that regularly bought her creations. The silence that followed was comfortable, the kind that only exists between people who don't feel the need to fill it with empty words. The distant sound of traffic mingled with the occasional bark of a dog and the soft rustle of the breeze in the tree leaves. "They grow up fast," Elias said, looking in the direction of the room where the twins slept. "It seems like just yesterday Lily couldn't even roll over by herself, and now she wants to conquer the world with those little legs." Sarah smiled, a mix of pride and melancholy in her gaze. "Sometimes I catch myself wondering what they'll want to be when they grow up," she commented. "If Chloe will continue with this passion for music, if Lily will keep that adventurous spirit." "The important thing is that they can choose," Elias replied, "that they have real options." The statement hung in the air as something deeper than it seemed at first glance. Sarah looked at Elias, studying his profile against the city lights. In recent months, he had become a constant in her life, not just a support or an aid, but an essential presence, a part of the fabric of her days. And this, she now realized, with crystalline clarity, scared her deeply. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice lower than she intended. Elias turned to her, those attentive eyes that seemed always to see beyond the surface. "Of course." "Why do you keep coming? Why do you care about us?" The question had been there, unformulated, since the beginning. Even with all the closeness they had developed, a part of Sarah still waited for the moment when he would tire, when he would realize there were better things to do than spend time with a single mother and her small daughters. Elias didn't respond immediately. He took a sip of tea, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because the 3 of you are important to me," he said finally. "More than anyone else has been in a long time." The simplicity of the answer hit Sarah like a wave. There was no unnecessary elaboration, no attempt to impress or convince, just the naked truth offered without expectations. She looked at the city below, seeking courage in the distant lights. "Their father disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy," Sarah said, the words coming out with difficulty, as if each one had to be torn from a deep, painful place. "I found myself alone. I'm afraid to get attached." And go through all that again. The confession hung between them, loaded with all the weight of sleepless nights, silent tears, the constant fear that had been her companion for so long. Elias didn't move to touch her, respecting the space that vulnerability demanded. Instead, he just nodded slightly, his eyes never leaving hers, I understand, he said, his voice low but firm. I'm not in a rush. I just want to be here for as long as you want me to. Again, the absence of grand promises or dramatic declarations, just the simple truth and the acceptance of her pace, her boundaries, her fears. Sarah felt something untangle inside her, a knot that had been so tight for so long that she barely noticed its existence until it began to loosen. He seemed different at first, she continued, the words coming easier now. Attentive, present. He talked about family, future. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it would be difficult, but that we would face it together. She paused, taking a sip of tea to mask the emotion that threatened to take her voice. First he became distant, then he stopped answering my calls. When I finally managed to find him, he said that he wasn't ready, that he hadn't asked for it, that he couldn't throw away his life like that. Elias listened in silence, his face reflecting not pity, but a deep understanding of what it meant to be abandoned. At the ultrasound, when I found out they were twins, there was no one beside me. I cried in the office, and the technician thought it was out of emotion. Sarah let out a brief, humorless laugh. It was out of fear, pure fear. The city continued its life below them, indifferent to the stories of loss and new beginnings that unfolded in every lit window. I had to leave the apartment where I lived. I couldn't afford it anymore. I moved 3 times during the pregnancy, each place smaller and further from downtown. I used all my savings, sold what little I had of value, and still, she didn't need to finish. The implications were clear in the silence that followed. Even so, it wasn't enough. Even so, she had reached that afternoon at the market, having to choose between formula and a blanket. "You are stronger than he will ever be," Elias said after a moment. It wasn't an empty compliment, it was a statement based on what he had witnessed over the past months. "And your daughters will grow up knowing that." Sarah felt a tear roll down her face and quickly wiped it away. It wasn't sadness, exactly. It was the relief of finally putting into words something she had carried alone for so long. Elias looked out at the city, as if he too was searching for something in the distant lights. When he spoke again, his voice had a different tone, softer, more vulnerable than Sarah had ever heard. "I've never told anyone this," he began, the words carefully chosen. "But my father was tough. Everything was about results, status." It was Sarah's turn to listen in silence, realizing she was about to learn a part of Elias he kept carefully guarded. "Since I was a child, the message was clear. Success first, always. Feelings were weaknesses. Relationships were distractions. He built an empire from nothing and expected me to do the same, only bigger." Elias paused, spinning the cup between his hands. "I achieved what he wanted. Company, respect, but it came at the cost of loneliness, and I'm tired of it." The revelation hung between them as something precious and fragile. For the first time, Sarah saw beyond the quiet strength Elias always demonstrated. She saw the weight he also carried, the expectations that had shaped his life, the price he had paid for meeting the demands of someone who confused success with personal worth. "What kind of company?" she asked gently. "Construction. We started small, with renovations. Today we primarily do commercial buildings. I have partners now. I stepped away from the daily administration a few months ago. It was a difficult decision. Your father didn't approve." Elias let out a short, joyless laugh. "My father passed away 5 years ago, but his voice is still here," he pointed to his own head. "Questioning every choice that doesn't involve growth, expansion, more money, more prestige." Sarah reached out, lightly touching Elias's hand. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact between them beyond the brief, accidental touches of everyday life. "And what do you want? Not your father, not the company. You." The question seemed to catch Elias by surprise. He looked at her hand over his, then at Sarah's eyes. "I want this," he finally replied, making a vague gesture that encompassed the apartment, the night, the 2 cups of tea, real moments, connections that matter. A life that has meaning beyond numbers in a bank account or a name on a building. The raw honesty of that confession deeply touched Sarah. She had always seen Elias as someone who had everything figured out: stability, security, clarity of purpose. Discovering that he also struggled, that he also questioned, that he also felt the weight of unasked-for expectations, created a new kind of connection between them. "It's funny," she said, a small smile forming on her lips. "I always thought you were here to help me. Maybe we're helping each other." Elias returned the smile, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "Maybe that's the point of any real relationship," he replied. "Not one saving the other, but two human beings walking together for a stretch of the road." From the room came a small noise, one of the twins stirring in her sleep. Both looked in the direction of the sound, then turned back to each other, a new silent understanding passing between them. "It's getting late," Elias commented, but without making any move to stand up. "It is," Sarah agreed, also without moving. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people who had shared parts of themselves they usually kept hidden, finding in the other an unexpected reflection of their own fears and hopes. "Thank you," Sarah said finally, "for telling me about your father." "Thank you for telling me about theirs," Elias replied, the gratitude in his voice genuine. That night, when Elias finally said goodbye, something had changed. Not dramatically or announced, but like a door slowly opening, revealing a path that had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to be discovered. Sarah stood by the window for a long time after he left, watching the city lights and feeling, for the first time in a long while, that maybe, just maybe, the fear of getting attached didn't have to be greater than the joy that connection could bring. Summer had fully set in, bringing longer days and warm nights. The changing of the seasons seemed to reflect the subtle transformations happening between Elias and Sarah, a constant warmth that grew day by day, without fanfare, but with unquestionable firmness. Visits turned into permanence. Occasional help turned into a daily partnership. What started as planned encounters transformed into natural cohabitation, without the need for invitations or warnings. Elias now had his own key. What emerged as a practical solution when Sarah needed to make larger cake deliveries and someone needed to stay with the twins became a permanent arrangement, without them needing to formally discuss it. "Fight, today I'm getting fresh bread before the girls wake up," he would say casually as he left, and Sarah would simply nod, as if that movement of coming and going had been part of the natural structure of their days for a long time. Mornings gained new rhythms. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, Elias arrived early with coffee and fresh fruit. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, it was Sarah who prepared everything while he helped the twins with their morning bath. On weekends, they cooked together, moving through the small kitchen in a synchronized dance that needed no words. "The flour goes there," Elias would say, already reaching for the right canister before Sarah even asked. "2 spoons of sugar in your coffee." "None in mine," she would reply, preparing the cups exactly as each preferred. The twins, now having just turned 1, had transformed. Lily took more confident steps each day, exploring every corner of the apartment with unwavering determination. Chloe, more cautious but equally curious, preferred to observe before acting, her large, attentive eyes registering everything. "Eid?" Lily would shout every morning upon seeing him, still struggling with the R in his name. "Eid story?" Chloe would ask at bedtime, already knowing he never refused a tale before sleep. For them, Elias was not an addition to the family or a frequent visitor. He was simply part of their world, as fundamental as the sun rising in the morning or the dinner that always followed bath time. Chores divided naturally, without the need for lists or discussions. Elias took on the weekly groceries and the small repairs the apartment occasionally required. Sarah organized the finances and kept the cake business running with growing efficiency. Responsibilities for the twins were shared without them needing to define specific roles. "I'll give them a bath while you finish that order," he would say on tight deadline days. "I can take them to the doctor's appointment tomorrow. You need to handle that company issue," she would respond when a scheduling conflict arose. There was a lightness in this dynamic, as if they had found a balance that many couples take years to discover. It wasn't perfect. Occasionally they disagreed on small things, like the ideal time for dinner or whether the twins should try a new food, but these differences were resolved with the same respect that characterized their entire relationship. On a regular Thursday afternoon, while Sarah finalized a cake for a birthday party, and Elias was putting together a puzzle with the twins at the living room table, something simple happened. Chloe managed to fit a particularly difficult piece, and both Sarah and Elias turned at the same time to celebrate the small victory. Their eyes met over the child's head, sharing a moment of pride and joy that needed no words. It was a brief moment, yet loaded with meaning, the kind of silent connection that only exists between people who share not just a space, but a life. Evenings brought their own routine. After the twins fell asleep, they would meet on the small balcony, sometimes with tea, other times with wine. They talked about the day, planned the next, or simply sat in comfortable silence, observing the city lights. It was on one of those nights, with the scent of summer flowers rising from the street, that Elias mentioned something he had been considering for some time. "My rental contract ends next month," he commented, looking out at the illuminated city below. "I was thinking about what to do." The comment hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Sarah felt the weight of those simple words, perfectly understanding what was not being explicitly asked. "You practically live here already," she replied, keeping her voice casual despite her racing heart. "Your toothbrush has had a permanent spot in the bathroom for weeks." Elias smiled, that discreet smile that illuminated primarily his eyes. "I realized yesterday that I have more clothes here than in my own apartment," he admitted. "And my fridge only has a bottle of water and salad dressing." Sarah laughed, imagining the contrast with their fridge, always stocked with fresh ingredients, cake leftovers, and the twins' favorite foods. It was Elias who did the weekly grocery shopping now, knowing exactly what each one liked and needed. "The girls would miss you if you weren't here every morning," she commented, advancing a little further in that conversation that danced around the central point. "Only them?" Elias asked, his gaze meeting hers. Not for the first time did that kind of look pass between them, that moment of connection that said much more than words could express. It had happened in the kitchen, when their hands touched while passing a utensil. In the park, when the twins did something funny and both turned simultaneously to share the moment. In the living room, when a special song played and they recognized the melody at the same time. "No," Sarah admitted, her voice softer. "Not just them." The next morning, nothing seemed to have changed. Elias made coffee while Sarah separated the ingredients for the day's cakes. The twins made the usual mess with their cereal, which he cleaned up without complaint. The routine continued its normal course, as if the conversation from the night before hadn't happened, but something subtle had transformed. It was in the small gestures, his hand lingering a little longer on her shoulder as he passed, the way their eyes met more often, the proximity they maintained even when it wasn't necessary. 3 days later, while washing the dinner dishes together, he washing, she drying, a choreography they had perfected over time, their hands touched under the soapy water. Instead of quickly pulling away as usually happened, they allowed the contact to remain for an extra moment. "You're already a part of all this," Sarah said, the words coming naturally, as if they had been waiting for the right moment. "We just haven't named it yet." Elias turned off the faucet and turned to her, his hands still wet. There was no surprise on his face, only a quiet acceptance, as if he too had just been waiting for the moment to acknowledge out loud what they had known for a long time. "Maybe we don't need to name it," he replied, his gaze meeting hers. "Maybe we just live it." The simplicity of that answer was so characteristic of him, no grand declarations or elaborate promises, just the essential truth that truly mattered. Sarah smiled, feeling simultaneously light and anchored, as if she had finally found her place in the world. It wasn't a sudden decision or a great leap into the dark. It was just the recognition of something that already existed, that had been built day after day, moment after moment. The following week, Elias's boxes started arriving. Not many. He was never the type to accumulate possessions, but enough to mark an official transition. His books found space on the living room shelf. His clothes occupied the empty side of the closet. His coffee machine, better than Sarah's, replaced the old one in the kitchen. The twins observed the movement with interest, but without surprise. For them, Elias was already part of the house. The official change was just a detail the adults had taken time to sort out. At night, when the girls were asleep and the house was quiet, they met as always on the balcony. But now, when Elias put his arm around her shoulders, Sarah snuggled closer. When their eyes met, they didn't need to look away. The first kiss came with the naturalness of something inevitable, without rush, without pressure, just the next step on a path they had already been walking together for months. A gentle touch that soon deepened, carrying with it all the care and respect they had built for each other. There were no grand declarations afterward, no grandiose promises. They weren't necessary. Physical intimacy grew between them like everything else, organically, respectfully, at the pace they both felt comfortable with. There was no specific moment when they officially became a couple. As Elias had said, they simply lived it, day after day, moment by moment, building not just a relationship, but a family that, in truth, had existed since that first cold afternoon at the market. It was something that already was. The suggestion came during a normal breakfast, between spoonfuls of oatmeal and cups of coffee. The twins, now nearly 14 months old, conducted their usual morning symphony of babbling and small feeding disasters. Lily tried to reach the banana pieces with her chubby fingers, while Chloe watched everything with attentive eyes before imitating her sister's movements. "I was thinking," Elias commented casually, as he helped Chloe hold her spoon. "My house has 3 bedrooms. One for us, a spacious one for the girls, and another you could turn into a studio for your cakes." Sarah looked up from her mental list of the day's orders, slightly surprised. "For your house?" she asked, realizing that in all those months together, she had never visited the place where Elias lived, before he practically moved into her apartment. "Yes," he replied, wiping a smear of yogurt from Lily's chin. "It's considerably more spacious than this apartment. It has a backyard. The kitchen is large. It would make your work easier, and the girls would have more room to play." As always, Elias's proposal came without romantic flourishes or grand declarations, just practical and genuine consideration for their needs. "You never invited me to see your house," Sarah observed, without accusation, just curiosity. Elias smiled in that discreet way she had learned to adore, a smile that rarely showed his teeth, but always illuminated his eyes. "Because I never felt it was a real home," he admitted, holding Lily's tiny hand as she tried to reach his cup. "It was just a place where I slept between work and here. This apartment, with the 3 of you, is where I feel at home." The simplicity of that confession touched Sarah deeply. Elias never used words to impress, only to express truths he considered important. "Can we go see it today?" she asked, feeling a mixture of curiosity and enthusiasm. "I want the girls to see it too." Elias nodded, without pressuring for a definitive answer. As always, he respected her timing, understanding that important decisions required reflection, especially when children were involved. The house surprised Sarah. It wasn't the imposing mansion she had secretly imagined, considering Elias's business success. It was an elegant but modest construction, on a tree-lined street in a quiet neighborhood. 2 stories, light-colored walls, large windows that let in abundant natural light, and a small front porch with empty planters. "I bought it 5 years ago," Elias explained as he opened the door. "After my father passed away, I chose it for the location and structure. I never dedicated myself to truly making it mine." The interior confirmed this statement. The furniture was of good quality, comfortable sofas, a robust dining table, a well-equipped kitchen, but there was an impersonality in the environment that contrasted with Sarah's smaller yet cozier apartment. No photographs on the walls, no objects with personal history, none of those small touches that transform 4 walls into a home. The twins, however, immediately approved. Lily, always the explorer, squirmed in Sarah's arms until she was placed on the floor, where she quickly crawled across the wooden flooring. Chloe watched with wide eyes the light that created patterns on the polished floor. Their room would be here, Elias showed, opening the door to a sunny room that overlooked the garden. It's spacious enough for separate cribs and a play area. We can paint it however you prefer. Sarah corrected softly. However we prefer. Elias smiled, perfectly understanding what those words meant. An acceptance, a commitment, a new beginning for all of them as a family. The move happened gradually, over 2 weeks. Elias insisted on doing everything calmly, allowing the twins to adapt to the new environment without stress. The larger furniture was transported by a specialized company, but the personal belongings, clothes, toys, books, kitchen utensils, were transferred gradually, almost like a transition ritual. We don't need to rush, he repeated when Sarah showed anxiety. We have time to make this place ours. The third bedroom, as promised, was transformed into a professional studio for Sarah. Elias personally involved himself in the project, consulting her on every detail. He installed large countertops at the ideal height to prevent backaches, accessible shelving for equipment, a professional oven specific for confectionery, and a dedicated refrigerator for special ingredients. You really thought of everything, Sarah commented admiringly. I thought of you, he replied simply. Know how to facilitate your work and allow your talent to develop further. The twins adapted surprisingly quickly. The spacious room allowed each to have her own crib, although Sarah often found them sleeping together, as they had since they were babies. The garden quickly became their favorite place to play, especially after Elias installed a double swing and a small, protected sandbox. A new routine established itself naturally. Mornings started early, with shared coffee while the twins still slept, a moment of tranquility that both came to cherish. The days were divided between Sarah's work with the cakes, which continued to be ordered with increasing frequency, and Elias's responsibilities with his company, now primarily managed from a makeshift home office. Afternoons brought walks in the neighborhood, visits to the park or games in the garden. Evenings were filled with dinners prepared together, lively baths and bedtime stories. The house, previously impersonal, came to life daily. Walls empty for years now displayed photographs of the girls, colorful drawings made by Sarah, and plants that brought vibrancy. The kitchen, rarely utilized when Elias lived alone, now remained in constant activity, with aromas of cakes, breads, and homemade meals replacing the former silence. Sarah's business prospered. The dedicated space allowed her to accept more orders and experiment with new recipes. The clientele expanded primarily through recommendations. People tasted her cakes at events and immediately wanted to meet the baker responsible. On a seemingly ordinary Wednesday, about a month after the complete move, Elias arrived home considerably earlier than usual. Sarah was in her studio, finalizing an elaborate wedding cake, while the twins were taking their afternoon nap under the supervision of the sitter who came 3 times a week. I have a surprise, he announced, entering the studio with an unusual sparkle in his eye, a mixture of excitement and nervousness rarely demonstrated. Sarah looked up from the delicate sugar flower decoration she was creating with meticulous precision. What kind of surprise? Elias breathed deeply, as if gathering courage, and placed a key on the counter. I rented a commercial space, he declared, carefully watching her reaction. I want to set up a little shop for your cakes. You deserve a place of your own, an adequate space to showcase your talent. Sarah froze, the pastry tweezers suspended in the air, alternating her gaze between the key and Elias's face, momentarily unable to process that information. A commercial space? A real shop? For me, Elias nodded, his expression revealing uncertainty in the face of a reaction he couldn't fully interpret. It's 3 blocks from here, on the main commercial street. It has an adequate kitchen in the back, which will need some equipment, but the basic structure is good. The front space allows for a display counter and some tables, if you want to serve coffee with the cakes. The contract is for 1 year initially, renewable, but... He hesitated, the words coming out faster than usual. If you don't like the idea, or think it's too soon, we can cancel it. I don't want to pressure you or assume I know what's best for your business. Sarah carefully put down the tweezers, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached him, taking his hands in hers. You rented a space for my cakes. A real shop. I believe in your talent, Sarah. I always have, since the first cake I saw you make. You have the potential for so much more than home-based custom orders. You deserve a space where people can get to know your work, where you can grow professionally. An intense emotion overcame Sarah, not just gratitude, but something deeper, a validation she had never experienced. Someone believed in her enough to concretely invest in her dream, to see value in what she created, to bet on her future when she herself occasionally doubted. Without adequate words, she simply hugged him tightly, allowing the tears she couldn't hold back to express what she felt. Is that a yes? Elias asked softly. Yes, she replied, pulling back to look into his eyes. Yes to the shop, yes to this new phase, yes to everything we're building together. Can we go see it now? She asked, suddenly anxious to see the space that would materialize a dream she had barely allowed herself to have. Whenever you want, he replied. The key is yours. The following weeks were filled with intense activity. The transformation of the commercial space required considerable work, but Elias used his contacts in construction to expedite renovations and adjustments. Sarah involved herself in every detail, from the color of the walls to the placement of the refrigerated counters, from the menu design to the simple uniform she would wear. I want a special corner for the twins, she insisted during the planning, a space where they can play when they're with me. Elias not only agreed but personally designed a safe, visible children's area from any point at the main counter, with appropriate furniture and educational toys. The grand opening of Sarah's Sweet Creations took place on a sunny Saturday morning. No elaborate ceremony, just a colorful banner at the entrance, a few strategically placed balloons, and free samples of miniatures of the most popular products. The first customers were the loyal ones who had been buying her cakes for months, curious to see the physical space. Soon, however, the irresistible aroma attracted unknown passers-by, quickly converted into new appreciators of Sarah's creations. The inaugural day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sarah alternated between serving at the counter, where her natural warmth instantly won over customers, and supervising the kitchen in the back, ensuring that each item maintained the quality standard for which her cakes had become known. The twins entertained themselves in the dedicated space, fascinated by the new toys carefully selected. As the afternoon advanced and the traffic slowed, Sarah finally had a moment to fully absorb the reality. This was her shop, her professional space. Her dream materialized in walls, counters, ovens, and aromas. Shortly after 5, the little bell on the door announced another visitor. It was Elias, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. Nothing extravagant, just a colorful arrangement that perfectly matched the cozy atmosphere of the place. How was the first day for the most talented baker in the city? He asked, approaching with that smile that seemed reserved exclusively for her. Incredible, Sarah replied, accepting the flowers. We sold almost the entire stock, and we already have orders for the whole week. Elias observed the space now almost empty, except for a couple who were savoring the last slices of pie, and the twins who were playing contentedly in their corner. You look like you belong in this place, he commented. As if you were born to be exactly here. It's how I feel, she confirmed, as if this space is a natural extension of what I am, of what I always wanted to be, even when I didn't dare admit it. Elias helped Sarah close the shop, organizing the last details while she tallied the sales and prepared the list for the next day. The twins, tired but visibly satisfied with the adventure, allowed themselves to be carried home without protest. Dinner that night had a special flavor, even though it was a simple meal. Elias prepared the dish while Sarah bathed the girls. The table was set with special care, with the flowers from the shop in a small crystal vase and rarely used wine glasses. The house that months earlier seemed impersonal had been completely transformed. Colorful drawings decorated the refrigerator. Toys organized in colorful baskets occupied a corner of the living room. Newly framed photographs adorned previously empty walls. The aroma of freshly baked cake lingered in the air. Even after a full day at the bakery, Sarah couldn't resist testing new recipes when inspired. After the twins fell asleep, Elias and Sarah sat on the back balcony, glasses of wine in hand, observing the garden now filled with carefully selected plants and the first stars that dotted the sky. "Tausame, thank you," Sarah said after a comfortable silence, "not just for the shop, for everything, for believing in me when I myself doubted." Elias lightly shook his head, his characteristic gesture to downplay any merit they tried to attribute to him. "You built all of this, Sarah. Your talent, your determination, your tireless work, even in the most difficult moments. The shop is just a space. You are the one who fills it with meaning." Sarah contemplated the extraordinary journey to this moment. From the cold afternoon at the market, with 2 babies in her arms and having to choose between formula and a blanket, to this quiet evening in a comfortable house, with her daughters sleeping safely, her own prosperous business, and beside a man who saw in her not just immediate needs, but deep dreams and unfulfilled potential. "I wasn't saved," she thought, watching Elias's profile against the starry sky. "I was welcomed, and that is more than I ever dreamed." There was a fundamental difference that Sarah clearly understood. It wasn't a story of heroic rescue, where someone stronger snatched her from a desperate situation, eternally putting her in debt. It was a genuine encounter between 2 people who, each in their own way, filled empty spaces in each other's lives. Elias hadn't saved her. He had offered constant support and respect so that she could find her own way, at her own pace. "What are you thinking about?" Elias asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Sarah smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. "It's about how surprising life is, how seemingly casual encounters can change everything, how true kindness builds more solid foundations than we imagine possible." Elias gently squeezed her hand, that small gesture that had become a language of its own between them, communicating understanding, support, and affection without words. In the house now impregnated with the aromas of cakes and shared stories, with walls decorated by children's drawings and newly created memories, something precious had been built. Not a simple temporary refuge against life's storms, but a true home founded on mutual respect, patiently cultivated trust, and that exceptional form of love that neither restricts nor suffocates, but simply nurtures and makes things flourish. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.